7 witnesses are expected to testify in the Pietermaritzburg High Court today as the Glebelands Eight trial begins. Testimonies will focus on the ballistic reports of guns used in hits allegedly carried out by the suspects who are currently on trial. Now, our reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo joins us live from the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Ziyanda, a very good morning to you and thank you for joining us. 8 men pleaded not guilty to these charges and the men didn't offer any explanation to their pleas. What's expected in court this morning?
A very good morning, Mpho. As you've already mentioned, we are expecting at least 7 witnesses to take the stand, and part of what they're expected to highlight on is the ballistics reports that have been compiled by authorities to say whether or not these are linked to weapons that have been used for alleged assassinations carried out by these 8 men who are standing for trial. Now, this is a significant moment, Mpho, because we've known that authorities have struggled in terms of actually being able to pin down DNA and linking them to certain people when it comes to these ballistics reports, because what we understand is that a large number or most of these weapons that are used for assassinations, not just at Glebelands, but around the province, especially when it comes to political killings, has been the problem of not being able to actually detect them on the system because they are arms that are actually illegal and are found on the black market. So we're expecting to hear where these weapons had come from, who had supplied them with these weapons, and where these weapons were likely used for which assassination. So they were expecting a whole lot more detail to come out today and actually maybe get a bit more direction of which hits or assassinations these 8 men can be linked to.
Ziyanda, we also know that the men don't face the same attempted murder charges. Can you talk us through the charges and who faces what in this instance?
Well, Mpho, the charges do range from murder, attempted murder, racketeering, and the possession of unlicensed firearm. For example, one of the accused, who is a former detective in the organized crime unit, Newzroom, he's facing charges of attempted murder, racketeering, and attempted and murder as well. Mpho, he's been his blood has been linked to one of the murders that took place in 2014 at the Glebelands hostel, and his particular, him facing trial, rather, I should say, is particularly interesting because of the fact that he was a detective in the organized crime unit. And Mpho, what we've heard from some sources who've told us is that actually Mdweshu was key in getting the wrong people arrested, because what would happen then during these turf wars between the different gangs at the Glebelands hostel, the allegation is that when authorities would be called out, because Mdweshu actually lived at the Glebelands hostel, he would direct them to the opponents, his opponents at the hostel. Therefore, and people would get tortured in police custody, etc. So this is significant because it's also indicative of the inability of authorities to get to the bottom of the cases because of a police officer himself being allegedly involved in these crimes. The others also face charges of racketeering, which relates to the collections of money forcibly from the residents at Glebelands. We know that what would happen is that these men would call meetings, and during these meetings they'd have rifles and handguns and would actually tell residents that if they don't contribute towards these fees, then they could face losing their lives. And what we've heard as well from activists and those who stay at the hostel is that this money that is collected from residents, the over 22,000 residents that live at Glebelands, this money is actually contributed or goes towards assassinations in and around the province. So the over 120 people who've been killed are not just people who live at Glebelands, but it's linked to Glebelands hostel because of the number of hitmen who live at the hostel.
Now, Ziyanda, before we say goodbye, we know that more than 100 witnesses are expected to be called, some of which are in protection and some of which who say that they fear for their lives. Talk us through what's at stake here and what are we expecting to learn from some of these witnesses who are set to be called?
Oh, there is a lot at stake, Paul, and the threat to life is very real. There have been many questions that have been raised about the protection of witnesses. You'll know that there are at least 4 witnesses upon which this trial is based on, and they are in witness protection because they were either allegedly working with these 8 men who are standing trial and have decided to turn state witness, or there are people who have had intimate knowledge of how this enterprise has been run at the Glebelands hostel. And so what we know is, and which is something that has been raised continuously during that Moerane Commission of Inquiry, was that the state, because of the embedded criminals within the law enforcement agencies, such as the allegation against the police detective from Dweshos, that they've been unable to protect witnesses, because by the time someone is in witness protection, they're either targeted and killed, or they're killed just before even entering the witness protection, which is why this trial is so big. The fact that authorities have actually managed to get witnesses to come forward, the over 100 witnesses, but also the fact that the people who were willing to come forward under the auspices of actually speaking out against these men and giving testimony, because it means that they too may face a risk of losing their lives. What we also understand, what Newzroom understands, Newzroom Africa has been told, is that there's recently been a hitman who's moved into the Glebelands hostel about a month ago. There's been a recent collection of fees from residents, and this is raising alarm bells on Paul, because usually, as I've already mentioned, once these residential fees are collected, that money is used towards an assassination, and there really is this cloud hanging over this trial as to whether or not all these witnesses will still be willing to come, given the risk of life that is now being posed, and they don't know what this new hitman who's moved into the residence means for those who are actually willing to come forward and testify against the Glebelands Eight.